We have today with us Dr. Pramila Kudva, who is a PhD in education. For over 18 years of her life, of her professional career, she's been a principal of three different schools. And all the three different schools that she was a principal of, she really was responsible for ensuring a total transformation in that school. So that I think is phenomenal, because if we can get the insights out of a principal who has turned around schools, who has taken over schools when they were at their lowest bit and then taken them to new heights and new levels, I think that would be really worth understanding her story. So welcome to Will Talks, Dr. Pramila, and I'm so glad that you were here. You're with us today. Just very quickly for everyone who's listening or watching us today, would you like to share any context for them in terms of where what you've studied, where you come from, anything that would set the context for our talk today?
Thank you for inviting me here. It's a pleasure. It's a long journey. I don't know how much I can share, but I'll try and keep it too short. A little short, not too short. I was married very young. I had just finished my graduation. Those days, there was double promotion. And I was a graduate at 18. And my parents thought, graduate ho gayi, now what do we do? Get her married. So I wanted to be a doctor. The zest for learning was very much there. So once the children came along and they started going to full-time school, I started studying. After a hiatus of 15 years, and I studied for the next 15 years.
Wow.
To the extent that I registered for PhD, and my son registered for PhD at the same time. And you won't believe, I beat him to it by 1 year. And I'm not going to let him forget that. So studies came along, and there was a time where I would finish all the chores in the kitchen, and everybody would be studying. I would be doing my studies, and my son would be studying, my daughter would be studying. And the whole environment at home was tuned towards academics. And I still continue to learn.
Wow.
Learning, I believe, begins with the cradle and ends where.
Yeah, but I mean, just that opening itself, there's just so much in there, because first of all, double promotion and finishing graduation at the age of 18, I haven't heard that before.
Because you're so much younger than I am.
So you got double promoted multiple times?
Oh, I would have got one more if my dad hadn't put his foot down.
Okay, so you finished your graduation. That's 3 years of graduation by 18.
Yes.
And then you got married, because I think I've heard quite a few women almost give up on their life the minute they get married, and especially when they get married early. So you tell me you got married at the age of, you keep saying very young, so.
I was all of 18.
Okay, so you got married at the age of 18, and then you took a hiatus for 15 years, and then you got back into studies.
Yes.
And then you beat your son for almost by a year in his PhD, right?
Yes.
I mean, that itself is a phenomenal story of, I don't know, I would say personal leadership at its best, right? Would you like to share something? What would you like to say about that experience that you had, or what made you go out and get back into education? What made you go out and really make that difference for yourself? And you finally got that doctor title to you. I mean, there will be so many women out there, especially in education, who I think should really hear your story in that sense.
I wanted to be a doctor, and my parents wouldn't hear of it. Of course, they had their own thinking. So I managed to get a doctorate instead. But it was not easy. When I first started I started doing my B.Ed after the hiatus of 15 years. And it was difficult to remember things. The definitions had to be remembered. The rest of it, you could say it on your own. It didn't matter. How do you remember definitions when I've cut off from education? So I would write it on little Post-its. In the kitchen, it would be stuck all over. So I wasn't the only one who knew the definitions by the time I I was ready, my children knew it too. Because everybody would see those definitions all over the kitchen cabinets. And when you're cooking, you're looking at the definitions. You're learning. It helped. It helped.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's amazing to see that your children, I mean, if you'd like to share what they do, how many children do you have? But your children were able to see their mother as a role model learner. Did you think that made a difference to them? What are your thoughts on that?
I don't know if they looked up to me as a role model, but as I said earlier, there was this environment which was attuned to learning. So everybody was a reader. I read, my daughter reads, and now even my granddaughter, she's finished entire set of Harry Potter. I don't know what she's reading right now. So everybody is into reading, and it helps, I think, if the parents don't have the remote in their hands. It helps, I think. Somewhere along, I think it has made a difference.
And I'm just so curious to know about, after 15 years, you mean, how old were your children when you got back into education?
Oh, I'll have to calculate that.
They're probably 10?
No, 1986. So my son was about 12. And my daughter, I have two children, and my daughter was 5 years old.
When you got back into education.
I got back into education.
Wow.
My son is now working for Corning, New York. He's settled in the US. My daughter has done her MBA from NMIMS, but she's given up her job, a full-time job, to take care of her daughter because her mother was working. So now she's doing some things on her own, which is keeping her busy.
And what is the kind of support you got at home with respect to your family, your husband, your immediate other people around you?
My husband has been very supportive. If it was not for him, I don't think I could have done my PhD. Because there was a time where I said, enough is enough, I'm giving it up. And he said, you made us suffer for the past 4 years. You're not going to give it up. And he did the proofreading of my entire PhD thesis.
Wow.
And he got it, he would type it in and make the changes. He did that. And if it was not for him, I would not have completed my PhD.
Amazing. I mean, that is such a story of encouragement and a story of support.
Yes.
And I love these stories because these stories are so different from what you traditionally hear all the time, right? And it's so nice to talk to somebody who had a dream, and that dream then got converted into a desire, and then you were able to create the determination, right, to actually make that happen. So many of us are just in that dream world, and just for us to see that, it just proves so many things, that people have all these self-limiting beliefs. So what was the first job that you did?
I started working as a teacher at Hasnath High School. And the principal of that school was my classmate for B.Ed.
Oh.
And I started working there. And later on, as a few years later, I went back to that school as a principal.
Wow. So how does that work? Like, this would be really nice to know. Like, you joined a school as a teacher. What were your experiences as a teacher of that school? And I'm sure there would be things that you would have been very happy with, and there would be things that you were not very happy with. And when you came back as a leader, many teachers feel they don't have the power and authority to change things. But now you've come back to that school as a leader. What were the things that you thought you wanted to change, or what are the things that you made change happen? Did you make change happen somewhere?
Yes.
Or, as they say in entrepreneurship, employees who have worked in a particular place and who are subject to certain rules, regulations, which they thought were not right, tend to keep the same thing when they become the boss, because they say they experienced that, So did you break that mold? Tell us more about that experience.
I did break the mold. When I went back, let me start at the beginning. When I was a teacher, in the school, I loved it. There was so much of freedom given, and we used to work on projects. And I was given to understand by the principal at that time that the ICSE boards initiated the projects into the curriculum after seeing what we were doing at Hasanath.
Whoa.
I don't know how true this is, but this is what she used to tell us. And later on, when I went back as a principal, I changed one thing. The primary section, we removed the textbooks. And we had what was called theme-based teaching, which the NEP is talking today. We did that in 2004. It worked. And the holistic learning, integrated learning, all that we did, it was interesting.
But it sounds really difficult for two reasons.
Yes.
One, you were a teacher who became a principal, which means this was your first principalship.
Yes.
And second, although you say you just made one change, that was a very significant change, right? To take away textbooks, because for most Indian schools, teachers, leaders, and parents, the textbook is the ultimate symbol of learning or academic experience, right? So how did you do that? And is there anything that comes to mind? Any very difficult situations that you had to get through?
I had to take the buy-in of the parents. Once you get the buy-in of the parents, it's a cakewalk.
How did you do that?
Convince them, show them, tell them, explain to them what are the advantages of not having a textbook. And it works. Yes, I had another thing in my favor. It was a small school. So the number of children in the class were also small. So it helps to have a small number of students in the class.
And why did you feel like textbooks is something that we should have moved away? What do you think the presence of textbooks in a classroom was restricting the teachers from doing?
Yeah, because it was restricted to the textbook. Then you get the children to mark the answer in the textbook, and then it leads to rote learning. Today, you ask any student after the examination any question, the child wouldn't remember. And I had one student who somehow made a contact over Facebook. I believe she was my student when she was in the 4th standard. Now she's in the US. And she remembered the song we used to sing when we went on a Bombay Darshan. So that is a proof for you.
That is so insightful in the sense that what parents might not know is how to assess learning, right?
Correct.
And maybe they're looking at the slightly inaccurate measures of evidences of that learning. And I think when we are confined to these restrictions of textbooks and things like that, in many ways, I think teachers stop thinking, right? They're only then trying to finish the book. So that would have been quite an amazing experience for you. What were some of the benefits that you saw after that?
The children could relate. Let me give you a concrete example. Supposing we teach Bombay in grade 3. Then we move on to Maharashtra. Then we move on to the other states or India. Before you talk about NASA, you need to know what Sri Harikota is doing. So the children are able to go from the known to the unknown, from the present, from the concrete to the abstract. So these are some of the maxims that we learned during B.Ed, and we've forgotten all that. So we were able to see the difference in that sense.
And once you moved out of this school, what was the other school that you went in as a principal?
I moved into another school. I don't know if I should mention all the names.
Another school.
Yeah, another school. A school with a good name to itself, a brand by itself. And there was no principal in the school when I joined. So the school was run by the HODs. So HODs were HODs. So when a person comes in there are a few things that I have to learn, few things that I have to undo, a few things that I have to continue. So it was a learning experience for me also, in the sense that coming from a very informal setup to a formal setup, there was a lot of unlearning that I had to do myself.
Do you remember any difficult moments in that place? Because this doesn't sound. A lot of people may not understand that. Like, what do you when you're moving from an informal setup into a formal setup, and you move from a school that did, where you were in charge, where you knew everything,
Yes.
right? You were on the driver's seat, and then you suddenly move to another school, which did not have, I guess, a principal or a driver, but it was driven by a few people with some sort of arrangements must have happened
Yes.
between each of them, to maintain peace. And then you suddenly come in. How do you remember anything from that experience? Anything comes to mind?
I don't remember exactly how it happened, but I can tell you about myself. I'm a people's person. So I go with the team. I don't let them feel intimidated. So that helps.
Do you feel there are lots of principals who?
Principals do have an air about them.
Okay.
They do have an air about them. I'm sure I also have it. I suppose it goes with the chair.
How did you then get all those teachers and all those HODs to start accepting you as a leader?
Well, they just had to understand that I was on their side. And we had to work together. Together we stand. That's one thing they had to understand. I think initially they were checking me out. But over a period of time, they accepted. So,
How do you know? How do you know as a principal if you're truly being accepted by your teachers? Would that be?
I suppose it's a sixth sense. I can't be asking them, am I okay? Are you accepting me? I can't be asking them that. But the way in which the body language, the tone, the words that they use, these things will tell you. मैडम हम ऐसा करेंगे क्या? हम ये कर सकते हैं ना? Not that. What do you want us to do?
Okay.
So there is a willingness to contribute. There is a willingness to innovate. And there is also the feeling that she's not going to say no. So that makes a difference.
That's that's really interesting, because from what you're saying, while a principal's job looks very administrative, very authoritative, but at some stage, I think it's such a role filled with empathy, with connection, with understanding, right? Were there any trying times for you in a situation like that? Like, how do you build empathetic, compassionate, supporting relationships with your teachers at the same time as a principal? Because you're like a super principal, right? You want to make change happen. How do you then have difficult conversations with them? How did you give difficult feedback to your teachers? Is there anything that you'd like to
I
think
don't
through and
remember all incidents, but there are some things which happened in the last school that I was working in. I run a tight ship. Because the school was down in the dumps. The morale was low. And there were some things that didn't go right when I took over. And I was given a mandate to set things right and to stay in the school for at least 5 years. I stayed there for 7 years. So a few things had to be set right. And there was no compromise there. So one of the things I told the team, I'm with you, but these are the things that we need to deliver. And I have no favorites. You do the work, that's it. I'm with you. So the no favorite works. Anybody can walk in. My door was open. Anybody could come into my office anytime. That makes a difference. And initially, when the teachers came in, they would tremble. They would tremble. I didn't know why.
They really tremble.
Yeah. I could see them. I said, sit down. What happened? Get them water. Give water to them. Talk to them. But it took them, I think, about a year to get over saying that, yes, this woman will listen to us. So it took some time, but it was worth the effort. Initiate the standardized operational procedures, SOP as we call them, put them into place, and ensure that there is an equitable distribution of work, not equal, equitable. Because some may get 19, some may get 20, but it's not that some are getting 6 periods and somebody else is getting 30. Even paper correction, everything we looked into and ensured that it was all done. 19-20 difference is okay, not more than that. So these procedures make them realize that you mean what you say. Walk the talk.
2-3 things, come to mind when you say that. One, there is this whole idea of fawning in school. And by fawning, I mean people tend to not put their thoughts forward in the interest of maintaining harmony and peace.
Yes.
And if there is a leader who's strong, then they just want to give in and be very compliant and eventually just completely lose their own sense of identity. So there is, on one end, there is this whole idea of fawning. On the other end, we want people to have a sense of leadership and we want people to take on responsibility. Now, the reason I'm talking about fawning is this, because when you say no favorites, you just add so much of safety, I think, in that group. Because the very first thing that many people like to do is just go become the favorite, right? Do a little extra work. How do you become the favorite? You do some overcompensating work, some overcompensating behavior, try and become the favorite. And through favoritism, I think they try to control the principal and then use that relationship to then leverage their position with other members of the group. So when you say no favorites and then when you act in that capacity, I think that itself is very, it just... I think it creates a very safe space, right?
Yeah, when I addressed them first and said no favorites, they clapped. They clapped. So that also rang some alarm bells. So I was breaking the norm there. So I changed what was the system that was existing to a different system.
So, 2 things you're saying there that really is powerful for me. One is the fact that you said equitable work distribution.
Yes.
Please tell us more about that. Like as a principal, how, because I'm now kind of thinking if it is inequitable work distribution, people then feel like they are being harassed and then they're not going to feel good and so many things happen. Tell us more about this equitable work distribution.
So what we did was, we decided how many periods an HOD should have to teach, how many periods an HM should have to teach. As a principal, I also taught, because without teaching, I don't know how I can survive. So each teacher Now, maths teacher, for instance, she will have 30 periods in a week. Now, art teacher may have more because he doesn't have corrections to do. The PE teacher can have more. He doesn't have any correction to do. So these things were made very clearly explained. They were clearly explained to the staff. So this is how it is going to be. And when the examination papers are given for correction, you have to see that somebody gets 8 bundles, somebody gets 2 bundles. That is not equitable. Ensure that everybody gets 40 students in a class, 6 bundles, that is 240 papers. 40 students and 2 bundles is only 80.
papers.
So here also you need to look into.
I think these details, I mean, I'm sure that it comes along, but for a principal to really watch over these details, show that the principal then cares for each teacher, right?
Yes, it makes a difference. Once they understand that these things are being sorted out, then I think they thaw. So once you are transparent, your deeds are all very clearly understood, I think you win them over.
Yeah, and the other thing that you mentioned was you got to walk the talk, which means you
Yes.
got to build. So on one end, you say you're from what I hear is you say you're a people person, but on the other end, you're also building systems and policies, which are upholding the value system that you have when it comes to working with people. So how did you build these SOPs? Did you get like an external consultant, or did you build it with your own teams? And what would you like to share to other fellow principals about these SOPs? What is SOP? Where do you need it? How do you make it? How long does it take to do? How do you enforce it? All that. You can have a nice...
It is customized in the sense that what is SOP to you for a particular process need not be applicable to me. So you need to say, from the point of entry, a visitor comes into the school, what is it that the security does till such time as the visitor leaves? So that is SOP. From the point the teacher starts making a question paper till such time as she enters the marks and hands it over, that is SOP, that whole process. So you have to just write down what are the stages and how it carries forward. That's all. It's not difficult. And you have Google with you.
So that's like a lot of principals say, they're tech averse, right? They're not very... A lot of them, yeah. A lot of senior principals feel like technology mera computer sir karega. Yeah, there is somebody else in the school who will do. Well, what are your thoughts on that?
I do my work myself. And I believe if somebody were to say that the senior citizens are not tech savvy, I'm willing to have a debate with them. Have an argument. And I'm sure I'll win hands down.
Fantastic. So tell us a little bit more about this journey you've had during the lockdown. I believe you got into a journey of creating artifacts or creating portfolios. Tell us more about what you built.
I've always been a learner, as I told you earlier. So I started writing a book. And the book got published just a little before COVID struck. So nothing much could be done. The Amazon shut down and no deliveries happening. So the book didn't do too well as far as the number of copies that were sold. But it gave me an exposure in the sense that I would write about the book and publish it, little nuggets, and publish it on Facebook and on LinkedIn and Instagram or whatever. And I got chance to conduct workshops on that. So in that sense, it helped me. And what I also did was take workshops for my own school teachers, which was a part of their upskilling. So actually, when I retired now, I think those teachers are much better off than some of the other teachers because they've already got an insight into several of the techniques that are already in the book. And I still had a lot of time. How many webinars can you attend and register? So I made a website of my own. WordPress gives you a chance to make a website. It's nothing great, not a very interactive website, but it's mine, made by me. And I started a podcast, an audio, and I've published about 62. Right now, I'm fatigued, so I'm taking a break from the podcast.
How is your learning? What are these podcasts called? If more principals and teachers want to go listen to the podcast.
A story for your query.
Okay, tell us more.
Oh, I love to narrate stories. And my students refer to me as a storyteller. So I said to myself, I can connect any story to any concept. So I said to myself, here is a chance. People have their queries. They don't know whom to ask. And here is a chance. I'll connect it to a story. Now, I'll give you an example. The Bhagavad Gita was narrated by Lord Krishna to Arjuna in the middle of the Kurukshetra. Because Krishna says, I cannot fight my own people. So Krishna tells him about the dharma, the karma, and why he has to fight these people. And that was linked to Lion King, which was made by Walt Disney. And that podcast, I think I called it Gita in Daily Life. How the lion goes out and how he finally realizes he comes back and takes his position, kills his uncle, and how the way of life has to be conducted, how it can be taken forward. So the Gita connected to Lion King. But I just narrated it, but Walt Disney did it.
So how would people be able to use these podcasts that you've done, over 62 of them? You think teachers could listen to them or share it with their classes?
Some of the podcasts were picked up by the teachers, and they have used that and for their annual day. Because every podcast I have got a last segment of that. I tell them how it can be used in daily life. Because without application, I think just giving a lecture is plain theory or a story is not going to go very far.
And I think storytelling is a very powerful way of getting people's attention and getting them to understand complex topics, right? And especially children love stories. And I think slowly with the advent of all this, in electronic media, I think that whole idea of sitting next to somebody and just listening a short story, I think children are not...
Let me give you one example. I was teaching in a school, primary section, and I've come from South. I'm from Bangalore. And my Hindi is... I can get by, but I can't teach Hindi. So the principal wanted somebody to teach Hindi. So she asked me. I said, I'm sorry, ma'am, I can't teach Hindi. She said, fine. So she asked one teacher of grade 1 to come and teach Hindi in my class, which was grade 5. And she said, you go to grade 1 and teach mathematics. I said, fine, grade 1 maths. I thought it was a cakewalk. I went there. I'm calling out the names and distributing the books. The children are looking here, there, except at me. They're looking everywhere else. By the time I distribute the book, it's time for me to leave the class. So now there were other sections. There were 3 sections, I think. 3 divisions. So the other two teachers are homeroom teachers. So they are going ahead. Now these parents will take me for a ride. I went back to the principal and I said, "Ma'am, I cannot teach maths." She put the specs down like this, looked at me, and she said, "You can't teach maths. You can't teach Hindi. What can you teach?" I said to myself, she's right. As a teacher, Hindi I don't know, I can understand. How can I say I can't teach maths? So I thought of teaching maths in a different way. I went back to class the next day. I said, "Today all books are closed." "Okay. You want to listen to stories?" "Yes, ma'am." "Okay." Gave them an option of some fairy tales. They picked up Gretel, Hansel and Gretel. So addition had to be taught. So we counted the marbles, we counted the petals, we counted the butterflies, we counted practically everything that Hansel and Gretel would have come across in the forest. 1 week, I had the meeting out of my palms. So, the moral of the story is, you just have to innovate. Teaching maths through fairy tales is a technique that I developed.
So, as being somebody who's been a teacher for such a long time and somebody who's also been a principal for again so many years, as a teacher, I invite you to go back and think about your journey as a teacher, especially after the story. What were the 1, 2, or 3 things that you really would expect or love to have from your principal?
Empowerment, freedom to think, freedom to discuss, freedom to execute. Looks difficult.
I was just, as you said that, I was just thinking, I mean, that's not what your principal did, right? She put her, specs down and
Yeah,
she
but
said, "You can't do this, you can't do that. What can you do?"
No, but that made me think. That made me think. If she were to say, "Okay, don't teach, I'll get somebody else," I would have probably remained in my comfort zone. She shook me up a little bit. I'm not holding it against her.
So there has to be a way that principals learn how to be empowering at the same time being awakening. No? Do you feel?
One thing the principals should practice, or for that matter, any individual should practice, is non-violent communication.
What's that?
When I say something, it shouldn't upset you. Why are you doing this? Why are you late? What made you come late today?
The first 2 questions that you asked itself just like suddenly raised
Isn't
my
it?
heart.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Instead of why, if you were to say, "What made you come late today?" that's less threatening. I'll give you 2 examples which I normally use. In a school, fighting in the corridor leads to suspension of the students. This is the rule. So 2 students were found fighting, and one of them who initiated it was taken to the principal. The principal looks at him and says, "John, you know why you're here? You're suspended. You can go now." Scene 1 closed. Scene 2. "John, you know you're not supposed to fight in the corridor, right? What made you fight today?" "Oh, he said something about my mom, he said something about my dad, or something," he says. "Well, we'll discuss that some other day. But you know that you're not supposed to fight. So what is the consequence? I'm suspended. I will ask the teacher to let you know what is done in the class today. Okay? So you're suspended for 5 days. Which is better?"
I felt a lot better in the second one.
So that's nonviolent communication with love.
I think we need to deep dive a little bit more into nonviolent communication, because I don't think that is a term that is very commonly and frequently used in schools as well. And I think that would be really good advice for teachers and principals. Teachers so that they can deal with their students, principals so that they can deal with their teachers, and also their spouses and children, and just generally. I mean, please have an open, soliloquy on where do you pick up nonviolent communication from? How have you seen that work in your life? How do you want principals and teachers to use that? I mean, use your time for that.
There is one other anecdote which comes to mind, another incident that comes to mind. There was a test going on in the class. The teacher was invigilating. She found a boy copy. So she brought him down to me. He was found copying. There are two ways of looking at it. A, the teacher should have been more vigilant, in which case the boy would not have copied. Two, if he has copied, you could have still given him some time to say, here, he was found copying, write it down and let him complete the paper. He was brought to me anyway. So I had a talk with the boy. Why did you copy? You know copying is not good. You know you're not supposed to do it. He was only putting his head down and not answering. So finally I said, look, I have got a choice for you. You either make a PowerPoint presentation and tell the whole assembly what are the ill effects, what are the implications of copying, whether it is worthwhile. Or write down what you did, introspect, and write what you should have done instead of what you did. He said, I'll make the PowerPoint. He made the PowerPoint. He explained to the assembly. He didn't copy after that. It's easier to punish, but it's difficult to deal with this. But this will be a long-lasting effect as opposed to punishing. It probably comes with the fact that I'm much older, so some patience comes in perhaps. But over a period of time, I found that children do relate to this kind of behavior from the principal.
How would you bring that to teachers? Because imagine if we have 50 teachers who also use these methods. And
I'm doing a course on happiness, how to be happy. Maybe I'll develop a module of workshop, because happy teachers bring in happy students. So my happiness should not be contingent upon my getting more money, or my getting another better car, or my husband telling me, oh, you're looking very nice today. The food was very good. So my happiness should not be contingent upon any of this. I need to feel happy for what I am and for what I do, and not relate it to anything else. थोड़ा heavy हो गया ना?
And as a principal, what would be these 2-3 expectations or aspirations or wishes that you would have from any teacher?
I would expect the teachers to be a little more, use a balanced approach, balance the head and the heart. I've always been feeling that, in the sense that the head tells you the logic. Sometimes the heart takes a precedence over the head. Like in this case where the boy was copying. My head tells me that he needs to be punished because he is copied. But I let the heart rule over the head, which has proved to be beneficial for the student.
Talking about teachers, and the role that principals have, a very complex role, how do you neutralize staff room politics?
You can't neutralize it.
Okay.
So politics is in every one of us. So it's human nature, I think, somewhere. Some do it more, some do it less. So let it be. Let them have their moments. They want to talk about somebody behind the back, so be it. What you don't know can't harm you.
So maybe that's something left best.
Leave it be.
Yeah. Ignore. As my mom would say, right? A genius of a man is knowing when and how much to ignore.
Yes. Yes.
Is there another book coming out?
I've got a second book which is already published. It was published on August 22nd.
What's the book called?
Oh, From Crust to Core, The Alchemy of Teaching. It's available on Amazon.
Would you like to share a little bit about the book? What that book is about, and who should get it?
Yeah. For the past 2 years, we've been hearing about NEP. The draft policy came in and we gave our suggestions and we had meetings and whole lot of interaction going back and forth. So it made me think. It is a beautiful policy, but implementation is not going to be easy because it's easier to use the chalkboard and teach and get out whether the student has learnt or not is not the problem. It's easier that way. But the implementation of this policy is going to involve a whole lot of techniques where the student has to become an independent thinker and not just a rote learner. So I mapped the NEP into 4 categories, and I have suggested several techniques keeping these categories in perspective. And to bring in a little bit of change, I have also categorized the teachers and the children into under different headings. For instance, the teacher who comes well-dressed and a good-looking teacher, she will be a person who will, no matter what she teaches, nobody pays attention. They're only looking at her. So there could be a student who is a popular student. There could be a student who is a backbencher. There could be a student who enjoys the gossip. So this was just a fun element. So I think it should be, definitely every school should have it in the library. Maybe more copies. The teachers can have it themselves because they can refer to it whenever they have a lesson plan to make. They can refer to it and pick up the techniques. That would be very, very, very appropriate, I thought. For the teacher who is put in several years, who has forgotten her techniques. Sorry, I'm using her every time because it's a world which is dominated by women. So the teacher can use that, experienced teacher. A fresh teacher can also use it because the fresh teacher will require more crutches to hang on to. And, the principal can also use it.
Of course. So from crust to core,
Yes.
and that book is now released and available on Amazon.
That's right.
And excellent for teachers and principals to start using
Yeah.
that book. Yeah, it's really nice to get books from people who have been teachers and principals for so many years, because somehow they are able to very beautifully distill all that experience and put it down as a work of art and contributing to the larger scheme of things in education. We are so thrilled that you were here today and you could come and share so openly about things which are important and things which are often most overlooked, because it's so easy for principals to just get really stuck with the whole idea of marketing their schools only, and the whole idea is to reduce cost and increase admissions and somehow manage parents who most of the time principals feel that parents are not on their side, right? So it was really nice to understand how we can, how small little things in terms of the equitable work distribution could be like a bone of contention for a teacher, and she may keep it within herself, and then that may just like play out in so many other ways, right? If there's any closing thoughts, if there's any final 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sentences that you'd like to share, please feel free to do so.
First of all, thanks for inviting me here. And a few things that I didn't think about. When you asked the questions, I could relate to them. Thank you for that. And yes, my book is available on Amazon. It's been several years of work that I've put in together in that book. The MRP is $350, but I asked them to bring it down to $250. It's available at $250 at the moment on Amazon. And please buy it and use it. The reason I made the book available for a cost is because if I were to give anything free, it is not valued as much as having to pay for it. So the more people use it, the better it is. And just a little bit more. The reason I wrote the book was because a student of mine sent me a foreword which said, "Die empty." I said to myself, I know I have white hair. I know I'm old, but I'm not ready to die yet. But then I started thinking about it. Die empty refers to sharing your knowledge before you move on. The Bhishma Pitamaha was lying down on a bed of arrows, and the Pandavas and Kauravas go to him, and he shares his knowledge before he moves on. So that's the inspiration behind writing the books. And that's what each of us needs to do, share. And when you share, you collaborate and you grow. Sharing you don't have to feel threatened by it. Sharing makes you grow. One cannot take away what is here. Share. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those powerful words. And that's it, folks. Today we have Dr. Pramila Kudva, and we are so grateful that after over 20, 30 years of professional service to schools and education, Madam has been very open about sharing and about what works and what doesn't work. So thank you for being with us today.
My pleasure entirely.